All right, so good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for attending the first webinar by Clean Energy for Africa in 2022. My name is Mohammed Al-Haj. I'm the founder and director of Clean Energy for Africa. We're very happy today to have a very unique guest, Dr. Ali Syed, President of Applied Energy Consulting, to talk about a very important topic that relates to the energy challenges that Africa faces, and also that many countries around the world face, which is energy access. So to kick off this webinar, I'm going to start off with a brief presentation to talk about Clean Energy for Africa, who we are, what we do, in case you're joining us for the first time. Then I'm going to introduce our speaker, his organization, and then we're going to start with the webinar. So, all right. So if you just joined us, Clean Energy for Africa, we are a youth-led think tank that aims to accelerate Africa. We conduct consultancy studies, market intelligence studies, and we also deliver capacity building programs or training programs. We have been working for, or have been in operation for almost 2.5 years. So we're officially established in July 2019. And since then, we've managed to build quite a sizable network of followers and members especially in our social media channels. We've also published a number of articles covering various topics on clean energy and sustainability. We've developed an extensive free knowledge platform, especially targeting students to help them understand the renewable energy field and how they can develop their capacities in this field. We've also had a mentorship program that we concluded just 2 months ago, and we're going to be launching another version of that program hopefully soon. We've also signed and built partnerships with a number of organizations in Sudan, in Canada, in Nigeria, and in other countries. We are a member also of a global hub of organizations known as the Youth Sustainable Energy Hub. And through that network as well, we've been able to have a larger reach and build a larger number build a strong network globally. We are a signatory in the Global Off-Grid Lighting Association's Compact for Power 1 Billion Lives. We're also a member of a global network known as the Global Waste Clean Network. And our team members, our team is composed of renewable energy professionals, engineers, researchers, and even some students. And they are regularly actually invited to deliver different talks in conferences and webinars. One of our biggest achievements was in 2020, where we were recognized by the United Nations Major Group for Children and Youth as being among the top 98 youth initiatives globally that promote SDG 7. We've also taken part in the United Nations Energy Conference that was last year, 2021 in June, where actually they delivered keynote remarks talking about the energy access challenge, especially in sub-Saharan Africa. This is us being acknowledged in the Global website when we signed their compact. And our website, which I invite everyone to have a look at it, includes a lot of free resources talking about technology-based renewable energy, how to develop yourself in this field, different kinds of courses, training materials, bachelor's programs, master's programs, and quite a range of topics published within our articles. And by the way, we welcome people from anywhere in the world to submit articles to be published in our website. So if you have an article that talks about renewable energy, around 500 to 700 words, please do send it to us. We'll review it and we'll be very happy to publish it in our platform. This is our team. So we have quite a diverse team that includes members from Sudan, Namibia, Canada, South Africa, Kenya. And we also have, of course, a broader network of members and consultants that we work with in different projects. Over the past 2.5 years, we've worked with a number of organizations, including media organizations, consultancy companies, training institutions, startup incubators, research centers, and other entities as well. Currently, we have 3 broad categories of projects we're working on. So we're working on first developing our mentorship program in the second version. Hopefully, it will be launched in June. All right, and this will be a unique program to teach young professionals how to develop themselves in the field of renewable energy. We also have a training program that is focusing on research skills in renewable energy, which registration has closed, so it already started. And hopefully we'll be making future announcements about this program. We have a training program on distributed generation, which is currently, we're developing it, and we will let you know once it's ready. And at the same time, we're conducting a lot of market intelligence studies, in particular relating to the Sudan market. So we have a couple of studies there. We already published one study about the challenges of training. I have another report that will be published end of this month or early March latest. That is a guide to solar energy for homes, businesses, and farms, and a number of other studies. Of course, we're not restricted by Sudan market, but it was a starting point for us because it's where we have most knowledge and most expertise. This is one of our reports that was published in the website about opportunities and challenges of training in the solar energy sector in Sudan. And these are our social media accounts and also our email. I'm going to put all those as well in the chat. So please feel free to send us an email if you have any idea for a project that you want us to feature, or maybe a collaboration opportunity. We'll be more than happy to feature it in our website. So today we're actually here to, of course, listen from our speaker about distributed generation. But before that, we're also happy to announce this unique partnership that we had with Applied Energy Consulting. The partnership we officially announced it in, I believe, in early January of this year. And the purpose of that partnership really is to strengthen the relationship between Clean Energy for Africa and Applied Energy Consulting, especially in the areas of training, capacity building, and also in the areas of consultancy studies and publishing of different reports. And Applied Energy Consulting, just to give you a brief background, it is an energy consulting company based in Canada. They conduct a number of services, offer a number of services such as energy audits, energy planning, and greenhouse gases management, lead energy modeling, building literature commissioning, energy and sustainability policy development, and they also conduct different kinds of research projects. So before I give the floor to our speaker, I just want to introduce our speaker. So our speaker today is Dr. Ali Syed. Dr. Syed is a professional engineer with 19 years of progressive technical project management and research and development experience in advanced clean energy systems, emissions reductions, energy storage, electrification, low carbon fuels, and energy conversion devices for different kinds of applications, whether it's for businesses, residential sector. And he is LEED certified. He's also a certified energy manager, certified measurement and verification professional. And he has published numerous journal papers and conferences on the topics of energy engineering, renewable energy, energy efficiency, and greenhouse gases mitigation. So a really experienced professional. I encourage everyone really to reach out to him. And we're very happy to have you with us, Ali, for this webinar. So the floor is yours now.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mohammed, and thank you very much, everybody who has participated. So before I go into the presentation, my request to all of the participants would be to, whenever you have any question, just jump in, don't wait till the end. So if you have any question, just jump in, unmute yourself, and just share your feedback. Let it be a collaborative exercise rather than me just speaking.
You guys, everyone can in the Zoom, you can just use the raise hand feature. So once you do that, I'm going to unmute you to give you the opportunity to speak.
So I'm sharing my screen with you. Please let me know if you see my PowerPoint. Are we good?
Yeah, we can see it, yeah.
Okay, so thank you very much again for this wonderful opportunity. So I'm Dr. Ali Syed. I am a consultant and I run a consulting firm called Applied Energy Consulting. And as Dr. Mohammed elaborated, you know, it's, by the way, do you see my web browser as well, or just the PowerPoint?
Yeah, we can see the web browser, yeah.
Okay, so So yeah, basically it's just a small firm. We work in renewable energy consulting, mechanical, electrical, and HVAC design, energy conservation, greenhouse gas mitigation, and my clients include a lot of utilities in North America, a lot of cities and municipal governments for whom I do the design of energy management systems and energy conservation strategies, giving them direction and guidelines towards achieving net zero status. Under, again, through United Nations Sustainable Development Goals plans, or even some local North American programs in Canada or USA, where obviously your energy performance is incentivized, and it is really forced by the government to reduce your emissions. And obviously, as Dr. Mohammed said, I am, actively involved in publications and, writing. I've just got a book contract from, on food security and under the changing climate protocol for developing nations. So, very fortunate to have a very broad range of experience and exposure. So that being said, let me go to the overview of what we'll be talking about today. So again, the scope of the today's talk is, again, within 1 hour, as much as we can do, which is essentially very limited, but we'll be scratching the surface essentially on the concept of distributed generation and how it overlaps with the Paris Climate Change Agreement. Obviously, it's a very, very broad topic. We really need to spend a lot of time understanding this thing, but I'll be, briefly giving you an overview. And again, if you have any follow-up questions, you know how to get hold of me. So the primary scope of today's conversation would be understanding how the economic progress of a nation is tied to the environmental degradation, potentially, how the impact of fossil fuels consumption is changing or impacting the climate change, and what we can do as energy conscientious professionals or energy engineers or policymakers to mitigate that impact. Certain sustainability initiatives. Again, I'll be limiting myself to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, and I will identify certain energy efficiency pathways, which we will kind of use to understand how we can mitigate, the climate change, especially in the context of distributed generation, electricity generation. That is, and again, you're welcome to ask question anytime. Just to let you know that at the moment I'm not able to directly see your chat or raised hand. So again,
yeah, I'll let you know.
Yeah, you will moderate that. Perfect.
Yeah,
Awesome.
I'll moderate
Thank you.
more.
Brilliant. So very important and very pertinent question, not or consideration, not only for developing nations, but also in the developed first world countries, is the energy inequality and economics. So lack of access to energy is definitely a big constraint to human and economic development. Obviously, if you don't have a reliable source of energy, there is very little that you can do in terms of your infrastructure upgrade, or even in terms of industrialization of your nation, of your city, of your country. This is, a graph that I got from the World Bank, and it is recording the data all the way up to 2016. And even in 2016, there are approximately 13% of the global population, amounting to 790 million, almost 1 billion people, who still lack access to electricity. And by lacking access to electricity means that they cannot run their bulbs, they cannot run their internet, they cannot run their smartphones. They have no electricity, complete lack of electricity, and that is 13% of global population. And it's a very recent data, it's not an old data. And that's a big, big problem. And then even with the rest of the population who has apparently access to electricity, there are still 3 billion, which is a major portion of world population. They rely on wood or coal or charcoal or animal waste for cooking and heating. Unfortunately, because of this disparity of energy access, women are disproportionately affected, primarily from the fact that they are cooking in the kitchens, for instance, using coal or using charcoal or any other, source like that, which tends to be very contaminant heavy and very bad for their breathing. So there are rising cases of, and disproportionate cases of women respiratory health issues because of the unclean sources of space heating and cooking. And that's a very major consideration. Again, without access to or reliable access to electricity, it's not uncommon for in developing nations for women to sometimes spend hours and hours in a day just to fetch a bucket of clean water. Clinics cannot store vaccines if you don't have a reliable source of electricity. School children, obviously, if you have no access to electricity, and there are studies which show that naturally in the dark hours, in the evening time, students cannot do their homework, and that is affecting the academic performance of a nation in the long run. Running competitive business is very difficult. Obviously, if you don't have reliable source of energy, you cannot run any endeavor, any business endeavor, especially in the COVID times when we are dealing with a very dangerous pandemic. It is becoming more and more difficult if you don't have a reliable source of electricity, because you cannot power healthcare facilities, you cannot power pharmacies, and on and on. Likewise, communication and IT challenges, that for us, who we're fortunate to have access to energy or reliable access to energy, we cannot appreciate how these, the things that we take for granted, how important these things can be, and how unfortunate are those people, a major portion of humanity who still does not have access to these things. So in that context, what is the main source of energy generation globally right now is the fossil fuel. And the interesting thing is that global emissions that obviously are a big consideration for our environmental concerns and climate change, between 60 to 73% of global greenhouse emissions are associated with the energy, be it energy used for generation of electricity for commercial and residential and industrial uses, or energy used for space heating or cooking or processes like that. Since 1990, and that's not very far back, it's only 30 years back or so, the global emissions have increased by 46% as per the United Nations. And ironically, the cities, the urban landscape globally, while it constitutes only 3% of Earth's surface, a very small portion of Earth's surface, is responsible for between 60 to 80% of energy consumption. And obviously this 3% disproportionate distribution of energy density or energy use associated with the urban centers is a big contributor to the energy consumption and naturally to the greenhouse gas emissions globally. And again, with that high energy comes a penalty of carbon emissions. Globally, when you look at the spectrum of energy consumption, this is based off of a very recent, from 2021, Asian Productivity Organization published this graph, and what they were showing was that, sorry about that, they were showing that, globally, obviously Asia being most densely populated, continent, is responsible for approximately 46% of global energy use, or in the year 2021, and was responsible for 55% of global greenhouse gas emissions. In contrast, United States, continental North America, that is, 16%, European Union, 9%, and again, others, where we're talking about Africa, Australia, and all the other nations, they were responsible for 26. So again, you can see that how much, population, obviously Asia being more densely populated region, has a very, very major portion of or footprint in the energy use of the fossil fuels, that is, and obviously the greenhouse gas emissions. So again, that's just a perspective on the global scale. We have talked about energy usage. We have talked about how little, like with 3% footprint, the cities, urban centers globally contribute to almost 80% of energy use. How does that impact the climate? So obviously the first impact that is being observed, undeniable, is the temperature rise. Of course, globally we're observing an increase in the temperature. We're observing more weather extremes. Obviously, with these temperature rise, weather extremes, excuse me, there are issues to our social, economic, and environmental pathways. The way in which our economic systems run, our social systems run, they are impacted by the climate change. What are some common threads? Floods, droughts, food shortages. And this chart shows you that within last sorry, let me 20, sorry, I'm having some, from 2004 to 2020, so 15-16 years, globally there has been a significant shift from the previous 30 years average. So basically this green bell curve that you see was the temperature distribution observed statistically between 1951 to 1980, and now in last 15-16 years, where the global extremes were only 0.1%. In 2020 alone, the weather extremes rose by 22.1%. And obviously this shift in the temperature spectrum and this shift in the weather extremities has direct impact on our agriculture, on our trade, on our social lives, and obviously overall climate. Another very noticeable impact observed from the, as a result of the climate change was melting of the ice caps in the northern most pole. With the melting ice, obviously the sea levels are rising, and that's an interesting thing that with this, if you follow my laser pointer, when this white surface, which is covered, by ice, as it is receding, the Earth's reflectivity is decreasing. In other words, more and more sun rays that are coming on the surface, hitting the surface of the Earth, stay at the surface of the Earth and are not reflected back, because there is no lighter surface to reflect it back. And obviously that contributes to an increase in your global temperature, and more solar energy is being absorbed. So basically it's kind of a snowball effect, but we are kind of getting deeper into the climate catastrophe on many fronts. Now, to counter this thing, or at least to slow it down to a degree, there's different sustainability initiatives that have been launched globally. A lot of those are national or continental specific. For instance, in North America, there are a lot of programs launched by the American government or the Canadian government, where we are looking into different strategies to reduce our climate footprint. It's likewise, there are a lot of initiatives like that in the Middle East, in the Far East, and definitely in Africa as well. But when we're talking about the global initiatives, one prominent one is the Paris Agreement, or Paris Climate Change Agreement. And it is basically a legally binding international treaty on climate change. And what this Paris Agreement required was that all the nations in the world were expected to do their best to lower the greenhouse gas emissions so that they could limit the global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius compared to the pre-industrial levels. So it might seem a very small number, but in fact, it's significantly, it's a big range. It's a big range. It can catastrophic, if we cross that, it can catastrophically affect the global climate spectrum. So scientists, in the United Nations and a lot of other research organizations, they came up with this threshold, with this number. And to translate that goal into greenhouse gas emissions, basically to maintain or to stay under that 1.5 degree Celsius bracket, you have to globally reduce your greenhouse gas emissions per year by 7.6%. And that's a huge number. Major paradigm shifts need to be done to realize that goal. It's a big challenge. Is it achievable? Yes. Is it easy? Absolutely not. A lot needs to go for this thing to be successful. Now, in November 2021, just a few weeks back, basically, in Glasgow, there was another conference under the United Nations Climate Change Agreement, and it was called COP26. And what they did was that they realized that the way, unfortunately, especially with the pandemic and the global political scenario, Dr. Mohammed, somebody's waiting in the waiting room, so if you can kindly admit them, because I'm constantly getting a prompt on my screen.
Yeah, I'll do that. Don't worry.
Perfect, thank you. So, basically, scientists realize that because of again the political realities, unfortunately, and a lot of other considerations, the initial goal of 1.5 degrees might be difficult to achieve. So what they have concluded right now is that, yes, globally, Paris Climate Change Agreement is still in force. However, from 1.5 degrees Celsius, they have increased the range to 2 degrees Celsius. It does come with a lot of issues, a lot of risks. But again, that's the way we are as a civilization globally right now. We are not at a point where we can reverse the climate change. We are at a situation where in English, they say you cut short your losses. So basically we are we will be facing some issues with the climate change, but at this point, the global strategy is to limit that damage. You cannot eliminate it, you can limit it. However, all the forward-thinking, progressive organizations and nations and regions, they still are pursuing to limit their contribution of greenhouse gas emissions as if it were 1.5 degrees Celsius as their goal, not 2 degrees Celsius. Do you have any questions at this point? I see there are some chat messages. Is there any question? Unmute yourselves and jump in, please.
Yeah, there are no questions until this moment.
Right. Yeah, but if you have any thoughts, any feedback, just jump in, please. I'll really appreciate it.
Perfect.
So under this, climate change plan or temperature rise bracket that we want to maintain, United Nations, there's experts and scientists came up with global goals, which are targets, which they called Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs. And these are collection of 17 interlinked global goals. And they provide you with a blueprint or a pathway towards achieving a sustainable future for all people of the world, right? And one thing which is very unique about this program is that this, while heavily focuses on energy and climate change, but it also includes a much broader spectrum of sustainability. And remember, sustainability is not just the energy. Energy is a portion, a very big portion of it, no question in that, but it's one portion. When you look at the Sustainable Development Goals globally, they range from ensuring policy making and implementation of infrastructure development in a way where it also limits the poverty, where it also eliminates hunger, where it also ensures good health and education and gender equality, and obviously clean water access, and in doing so, providing with reliable energy and economic growth, and how sustainable cities should be developed, and even the oceans, how to maintain the health of our water ecosystem. So basically, it's a very broad range of individual targets which are combined under 17 goals, which are again interlinked. And that's the beauty of this pathway, this sustainable development goal, that it is very broad and it is inclusive. It's not thought of in or conceived in isolation. So that is very important for you to know. Now, in the sustainable development goals, so basically they cover economy, they cover the societal aspects, they cover the biosphere, obviously, which includes the health of our oceans and the health of our general ecosystem and clean water supplies. And again, this discussion can go on and on for hours, maybe days, if we talk about individual goals, but I'm limiting myself. And again, we can convene again at a later point if there is enough interest. So I'm focusing more on the sustainable development goal number 7, which is the affordable and clean energy, and then understanding in this context how sustainable goal number 11, which is sustainable cities, and 13, which is the climate action, what are the synergies and how we can link these, especially in context of our current electricity generation model globally. So all this information on sustainable development goals is available for free, naturally, at the United Nations website. So I strongly encourage you to read about it, know about it, so that you, in your capacities as engineers, as policymakers, as responsible citizens, understand and implement, take those baby steps where you can contribute positively towards the climate change fight that we are all struggling and playing our roles. So
Ali, if I may just jump in here, I'm not sure if this is going to be covered in the presentation, but I think one question I'm very interested in, I think a lot of people also in the meeting with us would be interested in, is that, do you think, given the current developments that are going on in the sustainable development goals, specifically in goal number 7, do you think that we are on track to actually achieving this SDG 7, or should we be worried? And how should youth really, how should they react with regard to this situation that we're in? To have these very ambitious goals, but it seems that we are very far away from actually achieving them.
Yeah, as much as I hate to say this, but globally, not only in Africa, and again, please enlighten me what is going on in Africa, but globally, and even in North America, we are way, way, way behind these goals. Right now, with the political situation in North America, both Canada and the US of A, there are some positive progresses that have been made, that have been observed, but globally we are behind that. How youth should react to it? Please try. You are the leaders of the future. You're the leaders of this era, of this generation, not the future. Let me correct myself. So in your capacities, please try your level best to educate your politicians, your policymakers, your peers, your people in your community. Just educate them. Let them know that this is not a speculation. This climate change catastrophe is actually around the corner. This has been proven by the science. So whatever we can do to focus our priorities in the right direction is the only thing we can do. Unfortunately, I wish I had all money in the world, and what I would do is I would just spend trillions of dollars on renewable energy systems globally so that we can cut our greenhouse gas emissions down. But again, that's a wishful thinking. What we can do as individuals is to spread the word, basically, and that's the only thing we can do. And obviously, if you have more capacity, if you work in any policy making capacity, more power to you. Implement even a small baby step. For instance, a simple thing, you know, if your offices are overlit, just, and I will talk about that. So small baby steps that you can do. I will discuss those later in the presentation, and obviously expand on that. Try to make sure that more and more people know of this very serious issue that humanity is facing, and at least we can join our heads together and maybe come up with some strategy. I'm sorry, I wish I had a rosy picture, but there is no rosy picture.
Yeah, but I think what you said is very, very important. That's very true. Fida, actually, in the chat, she said, I'm sure some of us have already seen the effects of climate change in our own communities. Oh, yeah. So I think this should even be a bigger motivation for us to take serious action towards, this
I have
problem.
personally, I do a lot of mountaineering, and in last 15 years, I go to a glacier maybe 5-6 hours away from where I'm living right now. So in last 10 years, I have seen that glacier receded by 30 meters. So I've seen it with my own eyes. So it's not that, so I agree, everybody's facing the climate change catastrophes. And yeah, so it's all about letting more and more people know. And again, thank you very much. That was very good feedback. I appreciate it. So now again, remember, it's a Pandora box. I'm really slicing myself to one small portion of Sustainable Development Goal 7. It's a very broad topic. So one thing is to identify the energy conservation pathways. And again, we are limiting ourselves only to the energy generation. And at this point, I have a question for the participants, especially from the African continent. Question is, what is the most prevalent way in which electricity is generated in African nations? Are these centralized plants, big plants which are distributing to cities and villages, or do you have more spread out generation system? Can anybody enlighten me, please? Yep.
All right, Evie, go ahead.
Yep.
Hi, good afternoon. So in Africa, I'll speak for Nigeria, we have a centralized grid, but because the grid is unable to integrate renewable energy resources, we also have off-grid methods as well, where especially for remote areas like villages and the rural areas. So a lot of developers set up like mini grids because those people are probably too far for the grid to supply enough electricity to them. So it's a mix.
But what is the prominent, what is the most, like the bigger portion? Is it still with the central grids, or is it 50-50 or 60-40? Like, what is the breakdown roughly?
Oh, it's the central grid because Nigeria is fossil fuel based, so 80% of our electricity is from gas. So the central grid uses about, it supplies about 80%.
I know Nigeria very well. I spent first 3 or 4 years of my life in northern Nigeria. So Talata Mufara and all those. So my father was stationed over there, so I know that beautiful country. So yeah. So there were other people who have raised their hands.
Abdullahi, go ahead.
Please.
Hello everyone. I'm from Canada too here, but I have been in Africa lately. I have seen that some people use diesel generators, firewood, coal. In some parts, there's a hydro system, energy system, but it's very minute compared to the diesel generators and all that. So.
No, that's good. Good to know. Thank you very much. And again, if anybody has any feedback, jump in at any time. So yes, good to know. So basically, Africa overall, as per the literature that I reviewed, I haven't been in Africa in so many decades. I will go there one day. So, but the literature naturally agrees with what you're saying, that we have more fossil fuel based central generation model. Yes, there are smaller, decentralized, isolated generation plants, microgrids, but they're very few and far between. I understand. I agree with you. Thank you.
But Ali, actually, there are a number of African countries where actually hydro has the biggest chunk of the like in Sudan,
even
country is an example.
Nigeria.
Ethiopia, a lot of other countries.
Even Ethiopia, it makes sense, naturally, with the waterways, and then even in Nigeria, again, as I mentioned, my father was actually involved in that Talata Mufara Dam, back in the day, so design. So yes, wherever, obviously, but not all African, especially, when we're talking about, the Saharan, Central Saharan region, obviously, situation is different, but yeah, no, I agree. Thank you. So again, I used Asia Pacific region just because it still is 56% of global energy usage. So, and that is not very different from Africa as well. The main sources of electricity generation are coal, fossil fuel, and a very dirty fossil fuel. Natural gas, fossil fuel, oil, fossil. Yes, there is nuclear, very small, with its own pluses and minuses. Hydro, Africa, obviously, certain parts of Africa are really blessed with water resources, certain are not. Renewables, again, in Asia, there is more prevalence of renewable energy than even in North America in certain locations. So this will kind of give you a spectrum of how typically electricity is generated. And obviously, how you convert coal to electricity is that you run coal, burn coal to generate steam, for instance, to run steam turbines to, couple with generator and, produce electricity. So this is the, kind of the value cycle of the electricity generation system. So again, Asia Pacific. So main things, my apologies. So main things are obviously prevalent sources of electricity generation of fossil fuels. Now, one thing in Africa, in Nigeria, let's take our example, we know that we have majority fossil fuel based electricity generation. Unfortunately, even in the so-called, first world countries, I hate to use this term, but my apologies for that. But even in the US of A, there is no way that they can change their existing grid infrastructure into totally renewable overnight. It takes trillions, with T, not billions, trillions of dollars to make that change in a very long time. So one thing that you as energy professionals can do is to make sure that with the existing infrastructure of electricity generation that you have, why don't, because you cannot replace it overnight. It will take very long time, huge political will and huge capital. So try to optimize whatever you have. So make the best of the situation you're handed. So what you can do is, try to lobby within your political circles to offset, remove coal, phase out coal if you can, change it with natural gas, because coal is very polluting. If you're using diesel, sure, it's not the best one, change it to a more cleaner biofuel if you have any. If you can, again, if possible, and it's a very contentious issue, that is, maybe consider using nuclear power plants, in the long-term strategy, if you cannot, overnight, change your entire electricity infrastructure into renewable, and no nation can. So try to, number one, start thinking on the pathways of how you can do the best within your existing power grid structure. So, and then obviously, if you have
Ali, if I may intervene here, if you just go back to the previous slide, where you mentioned a couple of alternatives. So usually we hear this discussion a lot, especially within the community of renewable energy activists and so on, that there's a lot of debate sometimes about nuclear specifically. A lot of people take a very harsh opinion, very strict opinion that they're completely against it. No doubt, we do know that nuclear does pose some potential environmental threats, dangers, especially because of the waste and how to manage it and so on. So I just wanted to hear really what are your thoughts here, specifically from like an environmental viewpoint, because from a fuel and from a thermodynamic viewpoint, no doubt it's a very good choice, and a lot of the African countries do have a lot of reserves as well for uranium. So
it's a very divisive topic. I understand, and I totally agree with you that either you are full advocate of nuclear energy or you hate nuclear energy. Unfortunately, this has bifurcated policymakers. My personal opinion, again, rather, I shouldn't use my personal opinion. The peer-reviewed research says that nuclear power plants, if properly maintained and designed, are still very safe, very safe. Unfortunately, we have, in very recent memories, what, Fukushima, what happened in Japan, or in the 80s, what happened in Chernobyl. So obviously those are, but a very bad examples in our recent memory, and obviously we are afraid of these. There is no question in that. But research, again, regardless of whichever side you stand, either you're for it or you're against it, but research says that if properly designed, properly managed, and properly maintained, they can be very safe. Again, there are chances of catastrophe. I'm not taking a stand either for it or against it, but again, strictly relying on the peer-reviewed research, if properly maintained, they can be very safe, and vice versa. If not properly maintained, anything can fail. So that is where the scientific consensus is. Where the policy consensus is, that's again as divisive, as many opinions as there are a number of people, basically. So now what also you can do, again, going back to what you can do with your existing electrical infrastructure, is slowly integrate renewable energy. Wind power, how wind turbine works, basically. Photovoltaics, Africa is the prime candidate of for photovoltaics. Hydro, again, is not 100% environmental footprint free. It still has huge ecological footprints. I know very well. I've read a lot of studies, but again, it's cleaner. It's very clean. It still has impacts. Naturally, anything, there is no free lunch, as they say. So these are some ways. I know there are, in Africa, globally, we are, in different, kind of stages, or at different stages rather, on the integration of different renewable technologies. Some provinces in Canada are very heavy in hydro. Some are heavy in photovoltaics. Few are heavy in wind, but most of them are still running the conventional fossil fuel-based electricity system. So again, these are some thoughts to start convincing your political decision makers. And geothermal, this is an extremely important system that I very underrated, in my humble opinion. And this is not the ground source heat pump, this is the geothermal system. And what you do is you go, again, depending where you are geographically, but maybe between 900 meters to 2,000 meters, which is not a lot, when you look at, when you dig that deep in the ground, you start getting to the point where the temperature of Earth's layer at that point is so high that you can basically use that high heat to generate steam, which can run your turbines and generate electricity. And obviously the global estimates of the lifespan left with the Earth's core energy is at least 4 billion years. So basically, this is the purest renewable energy that we can see, with very minimal energy environmental footprint. Unfortunately, it's not talked about. Why? That's another discussion, which I will maybe do. We can talk some other time. But geothermal is a great system. Again, you're using the heat in the Earth's crust, and you don't have to go very deep. And there are nations which are using geothermal system, and they are completely carbon free, in their specific plants or specific areas where they're using geothermal systems. So please start thinking.
There's some actually very good examples about, especially for geothermal in Kenya, as an example, which I think has the largest capacity of installed geothermal, nearly 700 megawatt actually. and they're
Yeah,
using it for electricity.
That's wonderful. But, you know, in the grand scheme of things, 700 megawatts, you know, we're talking Africa-wide, globally.
Yeah.
It's still, unfortunately, not the best
Underutilized, yeah.
system. Yeah, it's very underrated for whatever reason, you know, but yeah, so start thinking outside the PV and wind turbines, please. Start thinking on geothermal. That's the way of the future, in my humble opinion. Now, again, when you look at it, and this is the global energy use spectrum, another way to start looking into how you can potentially conserve your energy is to see how the energy use is broken down. So globally, you're consuming electricity around 52% in the industrial sector, around 27% in transportation, 13% in residential, and almost 8% in commercial. So kind of start looking at, you know, these pie charts of your country. So for instance, in Nigeria, in Egypt, in Dubai, try to find out what your energy use breakdown is and then start prioritizing. So for instance, if I'm looking, if this were the map of Canada, for instance, the energy map of Canada, I will see that 52% is used in my industrial sector. So I will immediately focus my policies towards improving energy efficiency in my industrial sector. So start kind of, you know, using your decision-making process, developing your decision-making process using the statistical databases that is very relevant to your region. And again, this was just an example. Obviously, each country, each region is different. This is just the global average. Now, central energy generation model, as we all know, is that we have large facilities, typically, you know, away from the cities, typically. They have high voltage transmission, which is brought down in the substations where, you know, the voltage is brought down and then it is distributed to your houses or to your schools or universities or hospitals. And that's the way, you know, typically we are, you know, that's the central generation model. Fuels primarily are fossil, very few are nuclear, and very few, even fewer, are renewable. And this is, you know, we're all familiar with this kind of central generation model. Now, this is again a slide from the US of A, but it will kind of give you an idea of what potential catastrophic impacts are with the central generation system. And what in the US of A, with all its advancements and, you know, optimizations in their infrastructure, for all the, just follow my laser pointer, please, for all the sources that you're putting in to generate electricity, almost 68% are rejected as waste heat. 68% are rejected as waste heat. And we're talking about the US of A, the most advanced perhaps nation in the world right now. With all their energy input, only 32.7, let's call it 33% gets converted into usable energy. Rest 68% is completely wasted. Why? There are many reasons for that. I mean, I think we're really behind on time. But there are many reasons that the central distribution system, you waste a lot of energy. So even this is the most latest statistics from the US of A. So again, when you are talking about 68% approximately going to waste, you're talking about big environmental pollution, air pollution. Emissions obviously vary. If I'm burning natural gas versus coal, my emission spectrum will be different. But all the fossil fuels generate carbon dioxide, typically sulfur dioxide, definitely nitrogen oxide if you're dealing with diesel or things like that. Mercury and particulate matters if you're dealing with coal. Landfill waste, of course, that's an extremely important consideration that, especially with burning coal, charcoal, there is a lot of solid waste that has to be disposed, and that goes into your landfills, which can be very hazardous. Which kind of, you know, sometimes, well, most of the times contaminates your waterways. Then you require typically for central plants very large footprint of land. And then you have to use thousands of kilometers of transmission lines. In contrast, distributed generation model is, and again, this is out of a paper I wrote. So just to give you an example, that instead of having, you know, if you follow my laser pointer, your central plant hundreds of miles away, you just try to, a small community, and you basically try to generate your own electricity, your own heat. in the small, especially, as that lady earlier was talking about examples from, far, far-flung communities in Africa, in Nigeria. They're so far from the central grid system that they are their own. So that's a distributed system in contrast to the central system. It has its own benefits if properly designed. For instance, instead of, or you can have a hybrid system where you're talking central and distributed combined. Your end goal is to limit the use of central plants. Why? Because a lot of other reasons, but one which will stick in our minds is the graph that I showed you earlier, that typically in the US of A, almost 68% of energy is gone to waste. And that's a huge number, huge potential of savings. So distributed generation systems, in contrast to the central generation systems, are cost effective typically if designed properly. They can yield very high system efficiencies. I mean, the system efficiency with the other one, the graph that I showed you was what, 32, 33%, something like that. With a properly designed distributed generation model, again, my focus is on properly designed. Very importantly, properly designed distributed system can give you an efficiency sometimes in 89, 90, 91%. So look at 32, 33% versus 91%. There is no comparison, but it has to be properly designed because you can harness a lot of fixed heat.
And Ali, here, like this big efficiency is it primarily because the generation is next to the demand, or there are the other factors that are
not only because of that, because you typically lose 20% in distribution, typically. So it's not only because of that, it's because of it is close next to your, or very close to your end user, you can harness a lot of waste heat, because whenever you're burning coal or you're burning natural gas, you're generating steam, but then a lot of energy which is still in the fossil fuel, in the flues, in the exhaust chimneys. There is no way for you to recover that and transfer hundreds of miles towards the cities, right? So yes, you generate your system, electricity in your vicinity. You bypass the long transmission losses across hundreds of miles of, kilometers of cables. Yes. But the main thing is that you recover a lot of waste heat, which you can use for your hot water generation for another cycle. You could be using that for vapor absorption cooling. So imagine, you're basically repurposing that waste energy. So it's mainly because of the recovery of that waste heat. So yeah, these tend to be high system, again, properly designed. They can be very high efficient, low line losses. Line losses obviously are not eliminated. Compare if you follow my laser pointer. So line losses from 200 miles or 300 miles or 100 miles versus maybe 2 kilometers, 3 kilometers, maybe less. Obviously, the magnitude is very different. It's not zero, but it's much lower. Environmental impacts. Obviously, one problem with the distributed generation is that since it is very close to the cities, your land price can be higher compared to being 200 kilometers away from the city where land is cheap. And it could be aesthetically unpleasing, but there are always two sides of a coin. Pollution and water usage. So definitely distributed generation has far less pollution and water usage compared to the central. There is no question in that. The requirement of water for steam or or cooling even your plants is less. There is no question in that. Toxic waste, very important thing, is less. It's not zero, but it is much less. And one very important thing that I want to tell you, that if you are talking about integration of photovoltaic systems into your distributed grid systems, you are talking about mining for the rare earth minerals, which is very carbon heavy. So always look at PV system. Great, I love that system, but there is also carbon footprint in making that PV system. So always look at both sides of the coins. And then an important thing is that by 2050, PV cells, there is an estimate that 78 million tons of toxic waste because of the decommissioned photovoltaic systems will be polluting our earth and our oceans. So again, these are the other sides. I promote PV system, but always look at the flip side of the coin as well. Another extremely important and yet very simple thing that you can do to reduce your load on your central plants or even in your distributed plant is to improve your building energy efficiency. In Africa, use the U values or improve the insulation where you can minimize the impact of high temperatures so that your chillers, your cooling systems have to work less and thus consume less electricity and thus generate less greenhouse gas emissions and thus help you achieve sustainable development goal number 7 and contribute towards the climate change agreement. If you're using heating plants or boilers for your industrial or even for your building heating in certain parts of Africa or Middle East or wherever you're from, try to get the best possible efficiency in your boilers. Try to, very simple thing, use controls. For instance, if there is a big conference hall which is designed for 500 people, but you're using it only once a day for 2 hours, what's the point of running this system for 24/7? So these are small things that you can shut down the lights, reduce your set points, the heating or cooling set points when the building is not occupied. Some millions of these smaller things which you can easily implement with a very basic control system, and these are very cheap now. These are not expensive, affordable. Some other benefits of clean distribution, or what you can do is for the clean distributed generation is improve the generation efficiencies. Again, I know ideally we would like to switch everything to PV, but we cannot do that. It takes time, it takes a lot of money and political will to go in that direction. But as I was saying earlier, switch to cleaner fuels from coal to natural gas. If possible, integrate PV systems, improve your system efficiencies. If you have old boilers, if you have uninsulated steam pipes, if you have leaks in your steam systems and your generation system, try to fix very basic good housekeeping items. Incorporate waste heat recovery. Again, as I was discussing earlier, the primary difference of the reason for big energy efficiency jump from the central to the distributed energy system is because you're in the distributed system, there is a potential for you to recover the waste heat and use that and hence increase your efficiency by double, maybe 90%, 91%. I've personally seen these systems. It's not a theoretical construct, actual engineering design. Use combined heating and power again.
Ali, sorry to interrupt, but we just have like a few minutes left.
Yeah. So I'll be very quick. Yeah, I know
the
discussion just kept on. So yeah, again, go with the combined heating and power system where you're generating your electricity and recovering heat. And you can use that heat to heat your space or heat your plumbing water. Demand management, make sure that you are not, improving your power factor, you're shifting your demand to the off-peak hours. Just, design your systems, electrical systems, where they're running in a way that you're not necessarily making the systems fight each other. Both heating and cooling systems are working at the same time. No, just try to lower your demand. That is a significant contributor in your pathway towards achieving sustainability. Reduce your peak kilowatt loads, go with the efficient chillers or efficient motors, efficient pumps, efficient fans. Try to lower your lighting and appliance wattages by going with the Energy Star rated equipment, for instance. Lower the chiller loads. And I'll be grazing through it quickly. I'll try to finish in the next 2 to 3 minutes. So if you're using boilers, try to go with the condensing boilers, the high efficiency condensing boilers. They can, range their efficiency maybe 92, 93%. Instead of old school boilers, you go with the condensing boilers. Especially in Africa, where we are dealing with more of the summer HVAC loads, try to use the air side or water side economizers in your chiller plants if possible. You can sometimes, with the proper design of your cooling system, you can bring down your electricity used in the cooling plants by 70% by small changes. And imagine what you can save in your greenhouse gas emissions. And finally, lighting power. Aim for the lowest possible lighting power density while providing you with the ample amount of lux or lumen values. Use electronic ballasts, LED lamps, effective controls, optimize schedules. Again, instead of running 24/7, run only when you're needing. And again, an incandescent lamp, when turned off over the course of a year, when just one can save you $30 over the course of a year. And if you have 1,000 incandescent lamps, just by turning them off when not needed, typically, multiply that $30 by 1,000 or whatever number of lamps you have. Conserve water. Go with the high efficient water conservation faucets, by which basically gives you the same level of cleaning, but at much lower water usage. Low flow urinals and water closets. And yeah, this can carry on forever. So if you have any further questions, or if there is any consulting opportunity, this is my contact, feel free. And if you have any questions, let me know. Thank you for your patience. I think it was a good interactive talk.
Yeah, definitely, most definitely. Thank you so much, Ali. It was really insightful presentation, and especially the fact that you gave a lot of examples of practical things that we can start applying from today in order to reduce our energy consumption and contribute to reducing our carbon footprint. And also, I like the fact that you spoke a lot about a lot of opportunities for research that students can work on, or researchers. So because the movement towards achieving the global climate goals is not just about more renewable energy or solar PV. It's a much bigger challenge. So thank you so much for that. And I think as a participant probably noticed from the talk that there is really a lot of innovation needed in so many technologies, so many different kinds of systems, thermal based, electric based, storage, hydrogen, power systems. And that's, I think, one thing that makes the field of renewable energy quite exciting, is that people from various backgrounds can enter the field and work on it. A couple of people actually asked about the presentation slides, if they can get a copy of them. So of course the lecture is already recorded, so I'll leave that for you to decide, and we'll let them know then.
Sure, maybe write an email to me, and I can send to whosoever is interested. Just write an email to me, and I can.
Okay, perfect. Then we'll convey that to the attendees in our website and social media pages. Since we're already almost approaching the end, maybe you can take just a few questions. Or does anyone have any questions about this talk? All right, so I have maybe till we see if there's any questions. I have a quick general question, which is that like in this field of renewable energy and sustainability, and when we talk about climate change and so on, as a young professional, in order to actually contribute and leave an impact, do you necessarily need to be an engineer? Because you spoke a lot about so many things that are very technical. But what about people from non-engineering backgrounds? Can they have a role in this transition?
They have a bigger role than engineers. Engineers only apply the solution. Policymakers, financial analysts, educators, public servants, in whatever capacity you are. So you play a much bigger role than just the engineering people. So engineering people are only there to implement what you envision. So no, you don't have to be an engineer. You just have to be aware of what is going on and be open to newer technologies and scrutinize any solution that is presented to you. As I mentioned, PV, everybody's following the PV bandwagon. I agree, it's a good technology, but there is a huge flip side to the PV as well, which is mining the rare earth minerals. How are you getting rid of the decommissioned PV systems? They are extremely polluting to our waterways. So just make sure you understand both sides of a technology, and just be aware in whatever capacity you are. Policymakers have much bigger role to play than engineers. Absolutely, engineers are just applying these solutions.
You're making me feel bad now.
I'm feeling bad myself. I'm an engineer, so I feel bad myself every day.
Thank you so much. And one thing maybe that we can conclude with, which is if you could maybe give like an advice really to young professionals who are interested in this field, how they could prepare themselves for this revolution, and what kind of skills that they need to develop.
So one thing that I would strongly suggest, back in the days in 1940s and 50s, everybody was thinking about, it was the Cold War era. That was the battle of that generation. Your generation, my generation, our kids' generation, your battle, your world war is the climate change. So know that whatever we do has an impact on our climate. My advice to you is to understand how financial decisions are made. Okay, make yourself knowledgeable on energy economics. Make yourself knowledgeable on the global geopolitics. How, and most importantly, makes yourself aware on the impact of the moving away from fossil fuels, and how you can develop those presentation skills and networks where you can put cause a big impact to the elected officials in your nations. That is the one thing that I think you will be, if I were you, starting again, that is what I will be focusing on.
Thank you so much. We have one comment here from Muhammad Ibrahim, who said, the main challenge facing the application of the use of solar energy is the basic inputs for the production and storage of energy. We must think about the manufacturing of this technology within Africa so that we can benefit from solar energy that characterizes this continent, and even to be consumers of these inputs. So
that's a very important point. And Africa being so rich in minerals, you can go beyond PV. Look at other sources, like the geothermal system is the way of the future for Africa without disturbing your ecosystem big time. Yeah, Africa should be leading the world, in the next century.
Absolutely. Great. So since we have no more questions, I think we can conclude here. So thank you so much, Ali, for your time. Really great presentation. I hope everyone enjoyed it. Please do stay tuned to our LinkedIn and Facebook page. We're going to be putting the link for the recording for this webinar within just a couple of hours. And you have the contacts of the speaker. We can also post them in our platform, so you can contact Ali for any collaboration opportunities. Thank you, everyone, and have a good night.
Thank you very much indeed. Bye.